Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for online church today. Always good to have you. Hey, before we get started, I did want to mention the fact that this weekend is Memorial Day weekend, and just to take a moment to recognize the fact that there are many who have paid the ultimate price, the ultimate sacrifice, so that we can enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy today. And I just want to encourage you as you go throughout this day, would you take a moment just to contemplate and to be thankful for the sacrifices made so that we can enjoy what we enjoy in our country. And also for those that are currently serving in our services, we do want to say thank you. We recognize the sacrifices that you're making, all the things that you're doing each and every day to protect us, to keep us safe, and also to maintain the freedoms that we have. I'm thankful that we can worship together in a free country, and it's the result of people like you. Thank you so much. Hey, we're starting a new series today that we're calling Recalculating When Life Doesn't Make Sense. And this actual sermon is going to come out of the book of, these next several sermons are going to come out of the book of Habakkuk. And yes, I did say that right, Habakkuk. Some of you might say, well, I don't know, it could be pronounced differently. And so I did actually look up some other pronunciations for Habakkuk. One, you can actually say it this way, Habakkuk, like you have a cook in your house, and if you are sitting next to a cook in your house, you can actually say, hey, thank you for being a good cook. But that's not the way I want to say it. Or you can say it this way, Habakkuk, like as in you have a kook in your house, and you say, yeah, I definitely have some kooks in my house. That could be a way you want to say it, but that's not the way we're going to say it as we go through this series. We're actually going to say Habakkuk. And I want you to actually say this with me this morning. Say his name, Habakkuk. Say it one more time, Habakkuk. Can you pronounce it? Good, because we're going to be in this book for the next number of weeks. And this book is unique, not just because of how you pronounce his name, but it's also unique in nature. You know, going back to the namesake of this book, the prophet Habakkuk, his name actually means to wrestle or to embrace. And so as we're thinking about what this book really means, we're actually going to see as we go through our study of the book of Habakkuk, this prophet doing exactly that. He's wrestling with God, but then he comes to a place where he embraces God. And I really think this is such a powerful book for us to study right now. It's just very timely because I bet as we are facing all the current situation as relates to the coronavirus and now being released and looking at a new agenda, a new norm, and seeing even more challenges that may be coming our way, I bet there's many of you right now that are asking questions. You're wondering, hey, God, why do we even have to have this virus? God, why don't you just take this virus away? Why are so many good people getting sick or good people actually losing their jobs or losing their businesses? And so as you think about it, these are great questions, and you might be asking these questions. But I want to tell you, questions like this are not just centered around something like we're facing with a virus, but these are questions that has transcended through all times because we can actually ask these questions in other arenas. You might have been in a situation right now where you're thinking, you know, God, I raised my kids to come up in you. I raised my kids in a godly way, but now their lives, they're messed up. Or God, I've asked you to make me well because I have been sick, but yet nothing has changed. And questions like this, they're hard to handle. They're questions as to why are we going through these things. And if you're in a situation like that today where you're asking such questions to God, then I'm glad that you're joining us for this series because this is the exact theme of the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk asked God questions, and he asked them in a real and raw way. And it's something that makes this book attractive. It's real, it's raw, it's right where our emotions would be. In fact, I want to show you, we're going to hop into Habakkuk chapter 1, and I want you to see some of the questions that Habakkuk asked God. It's in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2. Look at what he says. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Wow. I mean, Habakkuk has some pretty big questions. I mean, he was really asking God some things that was on his heart, and they're raw and they're real. But what's great about Habakkuk as we go through this book, we're going to see he asks these questions, but he stays resilient in God. And this is what I want to ask you to do as we go through this series. We're going to talk about when we go through these seasons of doubt, how can you go through these seasons, but actually still keep a strong faith and even learn something new about God in the process, a new image, something that's even more beautiful than what we ever expected. So let's just, again, move into Habakkuk chapter 1. And I want to give you a little bit of background. Why is Habakkuk asking these questions? Well, Habakkuk was written in around 600 BC, and during this time, King Jehoiakim had just become king. And under King Jehoiakim, the nation of Judah, it actually started to take a moral decline. Before Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim's dad, King Josiah, he was a great king. He was a fantastic king. When he came into reigning the nation of Judah, he actually made many reforms and brought spiritual renewal and reformation to the nation. And God blessed the nation of Judah and blessed King Josiah in the process. But when Jehoiakim succeeded his father, he was not the same type of king. He was actually an evil king. He was a horrible king. He actually only thought about himself. And as a result, the nations followed suit with him into a wrong direction. And so this is what is going on when Habakkuk is asking this question. And I want you to see actually what the nation was like. In verses 2 through 3, let's look at it again. It says, how long, this is what Habakkuk says, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Do you see all these words that Habakkuk is using to describe the nation of Judah? He talks about violence and injustice, wrongdoing. He talks about strife and conflict that abounds. I mean, this is the nature of the kingdom of Judah. This is the direction in which they're going. And the prophet Habakkuk, he sees this and it concerns him. And so this is why he begins to ask these questions. Why, God, are you allowing this? God, why are you allowing violence to take place in your nation? Why are you silent when people are hurting and allowing Judah to deteriorate in sin? And listen, these are questions that we ask as well. And you might be asking similar questions like God, why are you doing this? Or God, why are you allowing this? Habakkuk is asking the hard questions. And so as Habakkuk is doing this, as we continue in Habakkuk chapter 1, what we find is that God finally answers the prophet Habakkuk. But this is where it really gets interesting, because there is a twist in how God answers Habakkuk. It really takes Habakkuk back when he begins to see what God is going to do. But look at how God answers the prophet. In verses 5 through 6, he says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people. So God speaks, and it's at this point, I bet Habakkuk's jaw just drops. Like, I bet he can't believe what he just heard from the Lord, because the God says that he's going to use the Babylonians to actually bring righteousness back to the nation of Judah. And this causes a significant struggle in Habakkuk's life. It causes him to have a dilemma that he did not expect. God to use the Babylonians? Are you kidding me? I mean, this revelation was something that was hard for him. And this is why it's hard. The Babylonians were a ruthless people. I mean, they were a despicable people. When you continue on in the book of Habakkuk and you look at verses 5 through 11, we're not going to have time to read them now, but God actually describes these people, and he uses words like ruthless and impetuous, devourers. They're mockers and idolaters. I mean, these people are killing machines. They're ruthless. They're 10 times worse than the nation of Judah. I mean, Judah was failing morally, but the nation of Babylon, I mean, they were spiritually bankrupt. They were deplorable type people. And this just didn't make sense to Habakkuk that God would use these people to chastise his own children, his own nation. It just not making sense. And let's face it, it probably doesn't make sense to us as well. And so Habakkuk, he expresses his concern. He expresses how appalled he is about this, and he goes back to asking questions of God. And this picks up in verse 12 and verses 13. Look at what Habakkuk says to God. He says, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you'll never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than yourself? I mean, Habakkuk cannot understand the logic of what's going on. God is pure. He cannot even look on evil, yet he will tolerate these wrongdoers, these people who are rotten to the core. He's going to allow them to swallow up his righteous people. And so right here, this is where we see that this dilemma of what he's hearing, we see Habakkuk begin to struggle in his walk. He begins to struggle in his faith. He's asking questions, and you might be asking similar questions. God, I've been faithful, but why is this happening? What's going on here? And I want to just stop and take a moment to describe what's going on. I want to put a name on what's happening right now with Habakkuk as he's entering into this season of struggle, of where he's really having a difficult time in his walk. What's going on with Habakkuk is that he's facing what is known as a crisis of belief. And it's important that we name this season, because there's going to come a time when you yourself, you're going to face a similar season in life, where you're going to come to a moment where you're going to have a crisis of belief. Let me just kind of give you, for example, a scenario of how this can take place in our life. And I want to take you back to, if this has been your experience, and I pray this is your experience, but I want to take you back to the time that you first accepted Christ as your Savior and Lord. Can you remember that time? I mean, for me, I could remember it like to this day. I remember that moment that I received Christ as my Savior and Lord, and how exhilarating that was for me. I mean, it was like coming out of night into the day. I mean, the colors around me seemed brighter. I was just so excited in my new relationship with Christ. And I went through this season of this spiritual high. It's almost like a faith honeymoon. And you probably can relate to that. I mean, can you remember that time when you would walk into a church service and it felt like that the preacher was just preaching directly to you? That sermon was just for you. Or that there was this continual growth or victory in your life over and over again. When you prayed, you just felt this intimacy with the Lord, and it was just powerful moments. The bondages that you used to have and the temptations that were wrapped around those bondages, they subsided, and you were feeling this new freedom in your life. And every time you went to Walmart, when you pulled up in the parking lot, the front space was always available for you. It was just a great time in life. But then there's this shift. You actually pull into Walmart, and for the first time, that front space is not there anymore. In fact, what you find is that you can't find a space, and you have to park in the very back, and it takes you a 2-mile walk to actually get to the entrance, and you begin to think, what's sliding here? What's different? And then there's those temptations that start to re-enter, going around those bondages of your old life, and they begin to creep back in, and you begin to think, well, why are these starting to come back? And then the unthinkable begins to happen. Like someone in your family, they become sick, and you begin to pray to God, and you ask God to take it away, but it seems as though God is not listening. There's no change. He's silent. Or maybe you go through a low point in your life, and you ask God, take this depression away, but he doesn't do it. And you see suffering, and it doesn't seem fair, and this list can go on. And when these things start to come to light. You start looking at these situations and you begin to wonder, God, it's not supposed to be this way. I mean, this is not supposed to be happening. I thought that life was going to be a whole lot better. And so when you come to this moment, I just want to explain what it is. When you enter this season to where you begin asking these questions, what's happening is you're having a crisis of belief. And when you have this moment, this crisis of belief, this season start to enter into your life, you have a couple of choices to make. You can, one, actually try to just not think about it, to actually try to gloss it over and just hope that everything is going to be okay and just hide from it. Or you can get mad and you can say, forget it, God, I'm just not going to take this anymore, and turn your back on God. Or you can go another route, and this is the route I want to ask you to do this morning, to go about this morning. You can actually recognize where you are and just start to wrestle. And what I mean by that is that you will actually just dive in with the Lord and begin wrestling with some of these questions that you have. This is exactly what Habakkuk does. Habakkuk he takes the spiritual dive. He dives in and he begins to wrestle with God. And here's the truth. When we allow ourselves to actually dive in and wrestle, what we're actually doing is we're building our spiritual muscles. We're building our faith muscles. Because when we go through such seasons and we do it in conversing with the Lord, what is going on is we're growing and we're maturing. I like this statement from Warren Wiersbe. He's one of my favorite commentators, and I like what he says about this, facing these type of moments. He says, to avoid tough questions or to settle for half-truths and superficial pat answers is to remain immature. But to face questions honestly and talk them through with the Lord is to grow in grace and in knowledge of God. And if you're in a crisis today, this crisis of belief, this is exactly what you can do as well. I want to ask you to actually step in and take the dive and begin to wrestle. And as you wrestle, to grow in your faith so that you can come to a point of having this grace and knowledge in the Lord and become strong. And so this is what we're going to do for the rest of our time together today. I'm just going to assume that there's some of you that may be facing this crisis of belief. You're at a moment or a season in life like Habakkuk where you're asking these questions and your spiritual belief and the spiritual reality that you see is not meeting up, and you're facing this crisis. And if you're in this moment, I want you to start going down this road of wrestling. And as you do this, I'm going to give you 4 wrestling principles, 4 initial steps that you can take in knowing that you're in this season, that you can begin to work on your faith and to remain strong. And we're going to look at Habakkuk's example and what he does to do the same thing. So let's start with a first principle, a wrestling principle, step number 1, and that is acknowledge and dive. And this is what I want to say to that, and what I mean. Acknowledge, if you're facing these questions, acknowledge it. Just realize where you're at, and then as you realize that you're in this time of crisis of belief, go ahead and dive in. Just go ahead and take the step. And I want to ask you to do this. I want to ask you to go ahead and ask the questions to God that you have. Go ahead and ask him to begin to reveal to you the why behind your questions. You know, don't settle for half truths. Don't settle for allowing bitterness to set into your heart and to want to turn your back on God. Instead, take this time to grow and to ask the questions. I want to tell you this. It's okay to ask the questions. Look at what Habakkuk does. Just going back to what he says in verses 2 and 3. He says, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? I mean, and we're not even getting to all the questions that Habakkuk asked, but he just boom, boom, boom. He just keeps going with these questions. He just kind of almost unloads on God. And And it's okay to do that. Sometimes we have these questions. And sometimes we hold back because we don't know if it's right to ask these questions. But go ahead and ask the questions. You know what's incredible? Even Jesus came to a point to where he asked a question. I want you to see this. Matthew chapter 27, verse 46. This is what Jesus says when he's on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? If Jesus even asked the question, they want to say, you go ahead, acknowledge, and dive in. Here's something else. Point number 2. This is another wrestling principle. Pray. You know, as you look at Habakkuk, all of chapter 1 of Habakkuk, and throughout the rest of the book, Habakkuk has this ongoing conversation with God. Throughout the book, he's just talking with the Lord and conversing with him, and he's praying. And I want to say prayer is so essential to times where we're in crisis, particularly when we're in crisis of belief. And so I want to ask you, pray to the Lord. As a part of your questioning, reach out to God. Going back to what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, he says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. I do believe this. I believe that as you continue to pray to the Lord, even though he may be silent for a while, I believe he will answer. It may not be the answer that we expected, but he will answer. So pray to the Lord. Here's another principle. Wrestle principle number 3, be real. And this is what I love about Habakkuk is that he shares his emotion. He doesn't hold back his emotion when he comes to the Lord with these questions. In fact, when you go back to verse 2, look at how he says it. He says, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? You know, you can see he's calling. He's crying out. That word for crawl is this kind of a beckoning out to the Lord. And he's the violence. He's saying, how long will I say violence and you not do anything, Lord? I mean, he's emotional about this. He's sharing his feelings. And I want to tell you, don't hold back your emotions and your feelings. Over and over again, our faith heroes in the Bible, they laid out their emotions before God. And there's something therapeutic about us doing that, speaking it out loud. And I want to go ahead and say this, is there's no reason to hide our emotions because God already knows what's going on in our heart anyway. He already knows the emotions that we're feeling and already knows what we're thinking. I like the way Jeremiah 23, the prophet Jeremiah speaks this. Actually, God speaks through Jeremiah. Look at what he says in verse 24. Who can hide in secret places so that I cannot see them? This is God saying. He's saying this. Do I not fill heaven and earth? I mean, God's saying this. There's nowhere to hide. God already knows what we're going through. So we might as well just let it out and speak with our emotion. Even if it means crying, there's something about having that release. And even hearing ourselves speak out these words, that God can use these words in our life. He can change us and lead us and teach us through what we're expressing. And so one last thing, wrestling principle number 4. This is what I want to ask you to do this morning. Embrace God. You know, going back to Habakkuk's name, what it really means. It means to wrestle and to embrace. And this principle is so super important. That in the midst of our wrestle, never forget to continue to embrace God, to continue to trust God. In all of your emotion, in all your questions, and all of your raw ability to come before the Lord, remember God's character and who he is. And this is what is great about Habakkuk, that he has these real questions. He has this emotion that's behind this. He doesn't understand. But as he's calling out to God, as he's praying, as he's asking this question, he does something very essential. And I think it's something that we should remember as well. He mentions the character of God before he asks these questions. Or in the midst of asking questions, he continues to bring up the character of God as he's praying. Look at what he does. In verses 12 and 13, he says, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. You see what he's doing throughout this time where he's about to ask more questions. He's also calling out the characteristics of God. He's basically sharing, as he's speaking it out, reminding himself that God's eternal, that God's sovereign, that God has a righteous, pure, and holy character about them. And he speaks these out so he doesn't forget who God really is and doesn't forget the character of God. And so in being a reminder that he can maintain embracing God and who he is while he's asking these questions. You know, in the middle of your doubt, it's okay to have these doubts and these questions. But also go back to the character of God and knowing who he is. And I'm going to get into this whole lot more next week to talk about how we can embrace God in his character. So stick with us. But what's unique about Habakkuk is that he continues to do this. And I don't want us to forget that God had told Habakkuk that he's going to do something amazing. And I do believe that Habakkuk had claimed, really held on to that promise. Look at again what it says in Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 5. He says, "Look at the nations." This is God speaking. "Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told." I mean, God had told Habakkuk he's going to do something completely amazing, something far beyond that he would ever imagine. And this was going to go beyond Habakkuk's understanding. You know, the fact is, God is already working. God always goes before us. And what he is doing is something that's utterly amazing. We can't see it, but God already sees it, and he knows. And so these are promises that as we're going through this doubt, we know that God can help us to understand, or we can help ourselves to understand that we know that God, he's going to be there for us, and he's going to have something new beyond what we can't see right now. So embrace God. Believe in him. Hold on to him in the midst of your doubt. So that's where we want to stop today. And I just want to encourage you that if you're going through a crisis of belief right now, would you just take some of these initial steps? We're going to get into so many more steps of this because I know that you're asking right now, hey, you could have covered this or that, or what about this? Well, we're going to get into more of these, so stick with us. But would you just start this journey as you're in crisis of belief right now, and do maybe some of these steps? Acknowledge and dive. Pray out to the Lord. Be real and embrace God. And I want to end with that particular one. Would you be willing to embrace God afresh today? Because some of you may have really been in a stage of doubt. I want to ask you, would you embrace God, his character? He is a loving and good and righteous God. And I just want to ask you today, would you reach out to God again and say, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to embrace you even when I don't understand. And for some of you today, you may have never embraced God for the first time. You've never embraced Jesus for the first time. And you're going through a difficult time. You're not actually having a crisis of belief. You're just having difficulty in life. And let me tell you, you need the power of God in your life to get you through this time. And I want to ask you, if you've never embraced Jesus before, would you consider doing that today? I do want to mention this. This is something that we do know about God. It says in John chapter 3, verse 16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." Yeah, it's great. That's not fair. That's grace. It wasn't fair for Jesus to go to the cross. It was fair for us to get what we deserved and to pay the penalty for our sin. But God is a graceful God. And if you need that grace in your life today, would you consider praying out to Jesus right now in the middle of your hardship, if you're there? Would you say, Jesus, I come before you today and I just want to give you my life. I want to embrace you. I want to trust you. I do believe that I've sinned. I do believe that I have fallen short of your righteousness and holiness, and that I need your forgiveness. And I thank you that you died on the cross for me and you paid that penalty for me. You died for me. Thank you for that grace. And Lord, I believe you rose on the third day, and that power is the power that can save me. And I ask you to save me today. I believe in you. I trust in you. I follow you from this day forward. I ask you to become the Lord of my life. Save me. And from this day forward, I walk with you in the name of Jesus. Hey, if you prayed that prayer, I'm so thankful for that. And I celebrate with you today, particularly because what's going to happen is the Holy Spirit has just entered your life, and you have a power within you to walk through any season of life with strength. And I'm thankful for that. And if you did receive that, receive Jesus today as your personal Savior and Lord, if you prayed that prayer, would you let us know that? There should be a button coming up right now that you can click to say, I've committed my life to Jesus. Let us know that, and then immediately fill out the electronic connection card that's right next to that, and let us know, because we want to follow up with you. We want to walk with you during your new season of faith. And for the rest of you, thank you for joining us this morning. And if you are in the middle of a crisis of belief, just embrace God, and would you begin walking down this road of wrestling, asking the questions, being real, praying. And I look forward to next week as we come back together to learn more how we can gain strength even in times where we are struggling in our faith. Thank you so much for being with us today. God bless, and we'll see you next week.